Hi, welcome everybody. This is the latest episode of Darabase Meets, where people across the Darabase team chat to and interview luminaries from across the industry, people who have a wide range of different kind of skills and experiences, but all who have an opinion and think about the future of kind of our digital lives and how that will become increasingly immersive, especially from kind of through the lens of being kind of location and city based. Today, I'm delighted to welcome an old friend and actually an ex-colleague, Mansoor Hanif, to join us. I'm going to read this, Mansoor, if that's all right, because it's relatively long, because you have an esteemed career. But I'm just going
If
to
you
go.
really want to bore people, read it all. Otherwise, you might just want to summarize it because there's a
I'm
lot
not
of
going
stuff
to.
in.
I won't read out your entire LinkedIn profile, but so Mansoor will get into this. But Mansoor has actually very recently left NEOM in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where he was executive director for digital and cognitive solutions. Which makes him incredibly well positioned to have this conversation. He was also, while there, head of infrastructure policy and regulations, the interim sector head of tech and digital, and kind of led everything to do with emerging technologies, including mixed reality, obviously very relevant to Darabase, space, satellites, advanced robotics, human-machine interfaces, metaverse strategy, etc. And before NEOM, where I think you were there for about 4.5 years or so, Mansoor, in
Yeah,
total.
roughly.
Yeah, before for joining NEOM, Mansoor was the Chief Technology Officer of Ofcom, here, the kind of the UK telecom and media regulator. And before that, actually, we worked together at EE, which is the largest telco in the UK, where Mansoor was the director of radio and kind of integrated the Orange and T-Mobile networks and helped to launch the 4G network, and where I ran digital. So we were peers across EE, Orange, and T-Mobile. And before that, had a kind of an esteemed career across telcos like Orange and Vodafone and the rest. So, Mansoor, welcome.
Thank you. You make me feel tired reading all that out.
That's probably because you're in the beautiful warmth of Valencia right
Well,
now.
yeah, I have a little bit of holidays at the moment, so it's quite
Time
nice.
for your siesta, probably. But
Not
I'll
yet. Not
I'll
yet.
keep you up for another hour. Well, maybe half an hour. So obviously, Mansoor, you have a lot of experience in the way that cities, especially, um, think about how they become increasingly smart, but also in your job title there at NEOM, increasingly cognitive. So can you kind of talk a little bit about kind of what you mean, what we mean when we think of a cognitive city? How does that really kind of um, be an elevated version of a smart city, and kind of what are your thoughts in terms of how cities start to become increasingly cognitive in the way that they build technology into their infrastructure?
Sure, and I should just kind of emphasize that I have left NEOM, even though I speak of NEOM from the heart, authentically, because it's still in my heart, will always will be. Sometimes say you don't shut the door on NEOM. It's something that stays with you for life. It's more than a project. It's a huge vision and experience that I'm still inspired by. But I'm speaking on my own behalf today. So whatever I say is certainly cognitive cities is very critical to NEOM, and we see eye to eye in many things. But I'm not speaking on behalf of NEOM today. So yeah, the key thing here is, first of all, if you start with a smart city, I think we have to admit that we're all pretty disappointed with the results so far. And I think the reason why people are disappointed with smart cities, despite like 10 years of people talking about them, is I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding when people hear about smart city applications, they immediately think there is a smart city. There is a city that is completely smart, and it's the definition, the template. And I think that's a misunderstanding, because today there is no city, as far as I'm concerned, as far as we've been able to find, where the smart applications are applied on the totality of the city. It's still patchy, it still depends. There are certain applications that are deployed in certain areas. And effectively, when we're talking about smart city, you're talking about smart city applications. So rather than a smart city as a city that's smart. So I think there's been a bit of expectation that we're already at smart cities and then we're going to go to cognitive. But the reality is there's a lot of work still to be done to make smart cities really smart. And I think part of that it's due to the fact that cities around the world have different functions. If you look at London compared to Birmingham, or compared to Edinburgh, or compared to any other country in any other city in the UK, or even around the world, the actual functions of a city and how it's actually governed and managed is different.
Hmm.
And so it's really hard to get to a common marketplace for smart city suppliers, because even a city's functions are differing. So there's been a lack of a common marketplace and a common understanding and common standards around smart cities. And that's been a frustration, I know, for lots of telecom operators because they haven't been able to scale up smart city applications in the same way as we have national networks, like mobile networks. So that's partially part of the issue is that the roles of cities are very different. Secondly, the second issue is around connectivity, and that's been part of my life for decades. And I know how hard it is to roll out networks around cities because you need to negotiate with a lot of landlords, and a lot of those landlords don't really want to speak to you because they've got better things to do, and they're not really concerned that you need to get fiber across their land or their building or put antennas on the roof. They may complain when the antennas aren't working, and then you might point out to them, well, actually, it's because we couldn't get onto your roof. But and we've had those conversations in the past in BT and E in particular. But that's the reality. It's just really hard to get consistent connectivity, and until you get consistent connectivity, it's always patchy, and the experience is patchy, and the expectations are going to not be met because it works here but doesn't work there, and we're all going to have bad experiences. That's what's happened. The other thing is data. There's a lot of data that is seemingly collected from us, but we still have this terrible experience of having to enter your personal data into 15 different forms in the same city or even in the same kind of section of the city. It's really frustrating, to do that and spend a lot of time doing that. So there are a lot of cities that have improved that a lot, especially like Singapore, for example, and Helsinki, and I could name a few other cities. But even then, the trust in what people are doing with your data and the sharing of that data across the city is very poor. And that's partially because of internal political reasons, and it's partially because there is a lack of common systems across the whole city to allow for that sharing, which means that effectively it's not efficient at all, and only about 5 or 10% of data is effectively used across cities today. So a cognitive city in that case is the next step forward, but it must be built on a truly smart city. And this is why I was very excited in NEOM on the line, because building from scratch, we can solve those three issues. And so can any other city that actually does things ambitiously and right with a vision of the future. You can effectively get to, first of all, the baseline is a truly smart city. You can do that by building the connectivity as you build the city, which is a huge privilege for NEOM on the line in particular, to be able to do that, to ensure that you have rock solid and reliable connectivity everywhere, which means you can have the applications doing a lot more and automating a lot more, And secondly, the data framework, the data sharing framework, the data trust framework, together with the privacy framework, needs to be redefined in a way that goes slightly beyond GDPR, which allows for greater sharing within the city for public good while maintaining data privacy. So the regulations around that are really key. And then effectively, I think in terms of setting standards, being the landlord of the city or being very close to the landlord of the city gives you the advantage of being able to create a marketplace that's much bigger. And finally, the standards around smart city infrastructure have changed a lot. It was very fragmented 5-6 years ago. All the key vendors wanted to protect their own data formats. Things have changed now with especially the advent of FIWare, which is a new standard that's emerging globally through Europe. Effectively, everybody's aligning around common standards of sharing data and sensors, which means that you can finally get systems applications that can work across the whole city. That's the baseline. Then on top of that, what's the cognitive city? So the cognitive element is really a city that understands you as a human being. It's human-centric. And today, our experience with cities, because of all the reasons I mentioned to you, it's very one-directional, and it's not very transparent. Our data, for example, is I feel I'm like a snail leaving a snail trail around the city that is no longer mine anymore, and everybody can see it and everybody can use it, and I'm not quite sure what they're doing with it, and I don't really trust what they're doing with it. Yeah. So first of all, we want to change that, and effectively it should be more like a halo that you carry, like a big hairdo. It's yours. You can see it, a virtual hairdo over AR, for example.
Yeah, nice.
So you own it, you see it, you know where it is, you know what you can see and what you're interested in, you know what you can let anybody else see. That changes the game completely, which makes you much more comfortable. So by getting to that point, you can effectively have a different relationship with the city. There's more trust, and the second thing is it needs to be bi-directional. Today, smart sensors even the smartest sensors, they collect data and they send it back to a central hub. And then somewhere there, we'll look at the software, they'll do an algorithm, and then it'll make a decision for you. And very often, in my own experience, is that they make the wrong decision. And then to make a complaint, you have to go and raise a complaint, and they'll say, oh, well, the software needs to be upgraded, and it'll take you this much money and this much time. Whereas it all should be real time. It should be a learning environment where the city's learning all the time. And it's correcting, it's asking you. It's bi-directional. It's saying, hey, Dom, we think you're hungry. We think you'd like to go for a snack, and we've got time, and there's a coffee here, we can bring it to you, but we're not quite sure. Just want to check with you. You're right with that. And you say, yeah, sure. Or you may not. The example I gave is a very personal one because I have a lot of issues with walking, and airports are a nuisance for me. And it happened to me, when people ask, well, give me an example of a smart application which doesn't work for you. It happened to me when I was flying from NEOM to Dubai, changing into Tabuk, and there was a delay to the original flight, but I still had time to reach the connection. I landed, and in Jeddah, we were changing in Jeddah. We arrived in Jeddah, and we got a message from the airline saying that they'd automatically booked our luggage into a later flight because we weren't going to make the connection. And that flight was going to be really, really late, getting in at 3 in the morning, which is not worth it. And I said, well, that's crazy. We got time to reach the connection. So we ran across, it was really hard for me to walk that way.
Yeah.
But we made it in time. We made it to the counter. We were ready to get the original flight. And they said, oh, but the smart system has booked your luggage. I said, well, that bloody smart system didn't ask me. Yeah. It's not very smart for me.
Pretty dumb, yeah.
So in the end, the only solution was to go without our luggage and to pick up, we get the luggage delivered the next day. Over a weekend, it's not very nice, right? So what should the experience be? The experience should be that the smart system, I landed, the smart system would have said, oh, we know that Mansoor is not very good at walking. And it would say, well, you're going to be tight for your luggage today, but we think you can make it, but we need to get you through a few shortcuts. And then the system would actually show me a few shortcuts around the back way, not breaking any rules, of course, but would give me some tips about how to get there quicker. It might actually say, by the way, there's a security guard over here who's quite friendly to people who have difficulty walking. I suggest you go to that counter, he might let you through. I know, that's a good idea. Yeah. And then it'll tell me, as we're getting into the counter, oh, by the way, we know you're hungry. It might be a bit risky, but if you want, there's a burger stand there if you want to have a burger before you get there. And it's my choice. It's my choice, right? So this is a city that's cognitive. This is a city that understands you and it cares about you and it's on your side. Yeah. And that's this cognitive city that we all want. Yeah. It's no longer a city that's just pretending to be smart and making decisions on your behalf without asking your opinion or really understanding you. But that's where the cognitive comes in. It's learning, it's understanding you as a human being. And it doesn't see you just as a point cloud or a set of data sets or readings from a sensor as an abstract form. It's building a complete picture of you with your consent and with your approval. And it's always asking you what you want first before doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think you picked a lot of topics there in that introduction, which we can kind of dive into. So let's maybe pick up the kind of the data and kind of big tech thing first, because it feels to me that there's kind of big tech, if we just use that rather than personifying it with individual businesses, but big tech are kind of being to a degree lambasted for saying, hey, look, you're pillaging all of this data on behalf, these snail trails on behalf of consumers, and then you're leveraging all of that data for your own value and good. But equally, from a city's perspective, it also feels that whereas, okay, let's choose Google. Whereas Google previously had Google Maps, and it's like, okay, this is an online version of a map, and we've been mapping cities for a long time. That kind of feels like a normal thing to do. And now Google Maps has gone from kind of a two-dimensional map with some directions to a three-dimensional map, to an immersive point cloud, to a geospatial API, to something which has a content management system attached to it, which now allows the commercialization of cities. And actually all of these things have kind of happened relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things. And cities have kind of gone from feeling quite comfortable that Google has a two-dimensional map because it's going to be useful for their citizens, to suddenly feeling that almost Google are kind of taking over how signage works in a city, and how content is overlaid on a city, and how increasingly with the advent of wearable devices and smart glasses, people will be able to see the city. And so it feels like kind of big tech has also started kind of really impinging on kind of how cities can kind of control their assets as well. And so how do you think we need to evolve in order not to necessarily fully disintermediate the Googles and the Apples and the Metas and whatever, the things that people are using, but for cities to be able to kind of wrest control of how they facilitate content engagement, citizen creation inside of the city, and at the same time the consumer, the user, is also then, as you say, able to kind of have their own control in a kind of more Web3 way, to be able to have a kind of more appropriate value exchange in terms of how their data is leveraged, because it feels that we're kind of coming at it from both angles.
Yeah, no, that's a really important topic, and I'm not necessarily knocking big tech. I think they've done a great job. They've been really good at what they do. They've probably been better than anyone expected. They deliver a lot of value, but I think it's the issue around the market for creativity and innovation in digital space, way beyond just cities, but as a whole, is dominated by a few small players, and that's not healthy for anyone, I think. And so, I very much believe that the advent of Web3 and distributed content and distributed systems is a huge opportunity to get back to the digital space, the digital internet that was planned in the beginning, and was designed. It was the way it should. It was the way it was designed from the origin. And there should be opportunity for everybody in that, and for cities and for the citizens of cities. So specifically on the cities side, I think that you want to enable, big tech, small tech, medium tech, anyone who wants to be there. It should be a fair marketplace for private industry and enterprise. However, key systems that the city offers, I think, for a cognitive city, if you look at what the city should be offering in the ideal world, let's take the ideal world. The city, up until now, cities have grown based on the utilities they offer to allow more and more people and businesses to come there and to grow bigger, etc. And those utilities were, water, energy, waste removal, etc. in the past century. And now they're increasingly in the smart city world that's just emerging, as we mentioned earlier. It's all about, access to software, digital government systems, smart parking. These are these type of elements which are driven by data, even siloed, and partial coverage of 5G and connectivity. So we need to fix that and make sure that those smart utilities are available across the whole board. Then on top of that, what are the cognitive utilities? And for me, ideally, what you would want is that a city can offer access to the best AI, the best data insights, the best robotics control systems and operating systems, the best AR overlays, and all of that coherently available to everybody over a single platform on a citywide basis to everybody. So the providers of those systems underneath, for example, you take AI, for example. I'm not saying we shouldn't, that a city shouldn't use OpenAI or ChatGPT or use the Google version or the Facebook, LLM. You can use multiple LLMs. What I don't think any city should be doing is locking in their future into a single LLM or a single partner. So the city has the role of an orchestrator, you could say, and it's very clear in the AI world that it should be making sure that whatever is deployed is ethically in line with the objectives of the city and the citizens, number one. And then afterwards, it should be open to everybody, but it shouldn't be monopolizing the city infrastructure, and it should be available to an orchestrator. And what I would call a smart city operating system or a cognitive city operating system allows all of these suppliers and partners to interconnect with all the city assets, but in a controlled manner, whereby then citizens, private citizens or businesses can simply dip in through an API into these utilities, AI as a service, data as a service, robotics as a service, and effectively create those cognitive experiences, those cognitive solutions and products. And I think that'd be a great place to get to, because effectively the city can lower its own cost of operations by having a coordinated architecture where they don't have to pay for a software upgrade each time they pay for a single silo. They have to upgrade all the other silos. No, that's why we don't proceed with digital upgrades today, because they're all done as spaghetti, and there's no centralized smart city operating system which allows you to pay once and then effectively scale up. So once you're removing that cost, it's such a fantastic thing for any creator, any small business to come in, dip into the AI, dip into the data, dip into the robotics, the AR, and having, a centralized inventory database like what you guys do is something which I think is very useful in that context, to effectively build the products they want based on whatever they need from those elements. Those are the new utilities that I think a city should offer. And the suppliers to those utilities should always be multiple.
So I think that, so let's think about the different types of cities, and I'm going to be very simplistic and think existing cities with all of the spaghetti as we think of it, and kind of the new cities, the NEOMs, the Kadeers, the giga projects, because there's pros and cons of each, obviously. And yes, there's a pro that, for the line, as an example, that, you're kind of literally, starting from scratch. You can kind of build this thing from the ground up and with a futuristic view in terms of how these things should work. And then you've got existing cities like, Madrid or Prague or London or Singapore or whatever, where there's a lot of legacy that you're having to deal with in order to be able to kind of get to this future. So couple of questions. One, how do you see those? Because they're not really in competition with each other. I'm either in Jeddah or I'm in Madrid. So how do you see kind of the future collaboration so that both of those parties can kind of learn from each other? And then kind of secondarily, how does this work commercially? Because clearly a lot of these giga projects have also got kind of giga budgets. There's an opportunity to spend significantly to invent a future for a particular region or whatever, and part of the investment is to build these cities and this new infrastructure. But if you're running a legacy city, you're trying to make ends meet, you're collecting the bins and so on, and it feels that actually the reason that the big tech companies have been able to invest as they have is because they've had a very effective commercial model sitting behind them, which is to do with the data and the advertising, often, or the subscription revenue and the applications and so on. And so, how also, do the kind of legacy cities build the commercial models? And this is maybe, when we think about this a lot as Darabase in terms of some of the technology that we can bring to kind of cities and property owners. How do they build the business models in order that they can invest to be able to facilitate this future?
Yeah, there's a lot in that. Just unpacking it a little bit. So first of all, yeah, I think it's fantastic this huge thirst for innovation and technology and the future of urban living in Saudi Arabia in particular and GCC as a whole, driven by giga projects such as NEOM, but not only NEOM. I mean, there's many in Riyadh as well, and several other giga projects across Saudi Arabia, and that's good for everybody, I think, because frankly, there's not a lot of funding that's available in the cities you mentioned. Everybody's facing a huge squeeze on the economics due to the current economic crisis around the world. So I think, however, it's also in the interest of Saudi Arabia and the GCC as a whole, as they invest and roll out these fantastic new experiences that are designed from scratch, that they need also this to be adopted by other cities around the world as they go, because they need to be standardized. And to be standardized, that means it makes it easier for these cities to develop these new technologies and services for the city, because big players will come in knowing that the market is not just a bespoke market there, but it's going to be standardized around the world. And it's good for the actual bottom line of the giga projects themselves, but it's good also as an extra revenue generator if these elements become adopted in cities around the world, and obviously they become standardized, and then there's IP revenue that comes from that afterwards. So it's a win-win, I think. And the other thing to note is that while it's true that very few existing cities around the world could do everything that's being done in a city like the Line or Murabba in Riyadh. However, I think that nearly every city could do a little piece of it. Where could they start? Now, every city has got some form of development. It might be a small scale development, etc. They could easily do pilots in those new development schemes. Another area that I think is critical, especially in Western Europe, is care for the elderly. And there's a huge push to develop more care homes as we all get older, including myself. And there's a big shortage not only of the care homes, so there's a lot of these care homes being built and financed at the moment, but also housing for the elderly in general, whether they're care homes or not. There's a lack of this, and there's a lack of multi-generational areas where people can live across generations, especially when people retain a certain health factor as they get older, thanks to new technologies. So those are areas where effectively lacking resource we have there is people, and it's just so hard to get people to work long hours in looking after the elderly. And that's areas where, for example, Japan is investing a lot in robotics today because of their falling population. So putting that together, you could see things like robotics and care for the elderly. Those are areas that most cities will be able to invest in earlier and kind of take from the learnings in the giga projects as well. But I think the area of greatest potential to start early is AR and mixed reality, because effectively that's an overlay.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest advantage of the giga projects and the GCC is that in some of these areas the land register is still being developed, and there's an option to put digital assets directly into the land registry and get more security. And therefore, that's why I think that Saudi Arabia in particular should lead the world on digital assets, because they can effectively, and NEOM in particular, I know that they have plans in that area, they can effectively give that guarantee to investors of having digital assets in the land register as an inalienable right, which makes the whole business case much better. Now, that's not the case in most cities, because the land register is very difficult to change, as you know. However, there are lots of buildings and assets owned by the cities themselves that they could start developing pilots on there in conjunction with the giga projects. So when it's municipal assets, they can effectively, without the land registry, give a certain amount of contractual certainty to companies who will plan to do the overlays. So this is where I think it's an exciting moment to cooperate between cities. How do we do that? My feeling is that we have an opportunity now for cities and city leaders to get into the loop of the next wave of technology as we get ready, for example, for 6G over the next 3 to 4 years. The next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be pretty much finalized the specification of what 6G should do. And I proposed to the Cities Today Institute, for example, that they should really look at what should be 6G for cities, and they should have a much more active role there. And I think one of the things I propose is that there should be a working group across cities where the city municipal teams should be fundamentally at the center of it, including the telecoms operators and suppliers as usual, but also including the urban designers, the urban planners, the architects, the construction companies. There's never been any type of this working group which is multidisciplinary in that way. So now there's an option to do that over the next few years and to define what do we want 6G to be for cities? What is the future of connectivity in cities? And I think that's something that would make a difference. And through that, you could start with a few early pilots with a few select cities working in conjunction with the giga projects in Riyadh or NEOM or in the GCC, whereby effectively you can see which of those elements can be already deployed on municipal assets in those cities. And that would be one of the packages that would be then brought into this working group that's working on the standardization.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what's interesting is that a lot of the companies, partners working on those giga projects, like Darabase, like a lot of, eminent global architects, like a lot of, big companies like Mott MacDonald and, developers and designers and so on, they're also doing projects all over the world. So I think there's also, often there's this kind of geographical, cultural kind of divide where it's kind of, well, there's some stuff going on in GCC and there's some kind of stuff going on all over the world, all over the rest of the world. And actually, often it's the same people that kind of working on both, because the GCC has been, whilst there's some amazing businesses, native from within the GCC, they're also attracting an awful lot of talent and an awful lot of partnerships from across the world. And so that kind of cross-fertilization opportunity, I think, is also key for
Absolutely.
Existing projects and existing cities, because there's this kind of elevation of education and understanding in terms of, within the industry itself, being driven by some of the kind of the requests and the vision from the GCC region and some of that, some of those projects which are really literally breaking new ground in every sense. To then start to kind of think about, well, how might that apply to something that is within an existing city, but is kind of as you say, a kind of a pilot area or new development. But coming back to kind of the commercial question then. So in terms of how do you think existing cities should be are able to kind of build the business case for this? Some of it will be paid for through partnerships, the 6G networks. Obviously there's an inherently commercial opportunity there for the telcos and the network operators, but at a city level, what do you see as the big commercial opportunities, whether that be kind of cost saving or incremental kind of revenue and value, in terms of how cities can almost become a sandbox for different types of experiences, which let's say are immersive, but which in themselves can create additional value for the city?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, if we take that example of the municipal assets as a starting point with an AR overlay. So effectively, what could happen there is, first of all, efficiency and cost savings on the operations side. So the management of the municipal assets themselves could be enhanced by the opportunity to have AR overlays being systematically defined over these municipal assets. Now, whether it's for cleaning, sanitization, or for other services, any type of maintenance, for example. There should be huge elements of cost savings there to start with. That's kind of a baseline, in terms of operational efficiencies. But then there's a huge opportunity to generate revenues as well. And effectively, I know you guys are the experts in digital advertising and outdoors advertising. So effectively being able to allow these municipalities to generate extra revenues from digital placements of advertising, but also respecting the culture and the norms and the rules of each city specifically, is effectively a sweet spot, whereby effectively you make the compromise of saying, okay, we're not going to allow anybody to do anything over our wonderful heritage assets here. However, we can control through a rules engine, like for example, that we experimented with in NEOM when we worked together. And you can effectively then effectively get a balance between making sure that the cultural objectives and the social impact objectives are maintained and enforced, but at the same time allowing for the generation of extra revenues from the use of these assets for advertisers, number one. But it doesn't stop there. When it gets really exciting is when you can actually then not only make revenues for the municipality, but then the municipality can then offer up to its citizens to get involved and to create extra revenues themselves through creating AR experiences on top of those municipal assets that anybody can access, and those can be monetized. That's where I get really excited, because I'm not from the, I know you guys have got the advertising world covered. I'm more on the digital assets world, the
Well,
creator.
advertising is only relevant if it's coupled with editorial, right? You need to have something against which to put the commercial opportunity. So I think you're absolutely right. For the city to be able to kind of offer itself as a canvas to its citizens to be able to create all manner of different types of entertaining or educational experiences, I think is a great opportunity. I mean, similar to, they've always done this. Cities have put up statues. Cities have allowed public art. Cities have created entertainment and theatre. But it's just kind of, okay, well, what's the immersive nature of that now, and how do we
An interesting one. The statue is
how
an
do we
interesting one.
facilitate that?
We're in the middle of cultural wars here, right? Statues going up, statues going down. Some people are trying to pull them up, some trying to pull them down. Everybody, I have to say, one of the biggest issues of us, all of us as human beings, is how good will we be at agreeing to disagree? Because we're not going to agree. Me and my wife argue all the time, everything.
Well,
So
they are. I'll see a different statue to you, Mansoor. We'll be good. It'll be personalized. You can see who you want to see.
what I
I'll see
see,
who I want to see.
what I see digital technology. So I mean, I'm not going to. I think everybody's got the right to their opinion and the right to their view. What I love about digital technology and the way it should be done, not the VR where you just kind of, all right, you guys do what you want, and I'm going to have my isolated world and I live here. No, it's the fact that effectively with digital enablement of these virtual spaces, a municipality could allow for different statues for different groups, or to allow for different versions of it, and allow for a lot more flexibility and freedom for different views, and not having to say has to be this or has to be that. They could just set the guardrails of what's acceptable and what's not. And then a group that wants to have a certain type of statue, or another group that wants to have another type of statue, it's all there for you to see, and you can actually see it together if you want to. That's what I love about, if we do this right, we create spaces where people come together and agree or agree not to agree, but not to kill each other. That's what I love about this digital. That's the opportunity that we have, and that's a totally new world that we can dip into.
So one thing that cities are doing a lot, and we kind of you touched on it in your introduction, and I'll use the term kind of broadly, digital twin. A lot of cities are investing and they're thinking about creating digital twins of their cities or parts of their cities, and a lot of that, in my opinion, is kind of sucking data from the physical city into something which is digital in order to allow them to model different things and whatever. But it feels a fairly kind of city municipal centric activity currently. Um, it's an operational tool, a modeling tool, etc. And yet, what's pretty interesting? So, relatively recently, Google launched their geospatial API, and one of the ways that we place content on the physical world in augmented reality is we can kind of go into Google's geospatial API inside of a Unity wrapper, and it's almost like it is a digital twin of the world, and I can then place digital content into that digital twin in order to almost like a kind of a control box, a sandbox, which then manifests itself physically in the vertical in the physical world in augmented reality. So I can kind of go to London, I can put a spinning Ferrari above Piccadilly Circus or whatever. Not that I've done that, but let's say I did, and then I can go to Piccadilly Circus, hold up my phone, and there will be the Ferrari using the coordinates from the digital twin, and so. And we had this conversation recently, but it does feel that what's the city version of that? So cities have their digital twins, and we've talked about opening up the city to their citizens, to their creators. How do you see a city's digital twin and augmented reality content on the physical city kind of interrelating, and what's the opportunity to kind of be more proactive and kind of giving access to both?
Yeah, I think we should be aware that, I mean, digital twins are, propagating very fast now as the digital twin generation technology gets, cheaper and better.
Yep.
So many cities have already caught it, and they're really, I would say there's two types. There's the absolute digital replica of a city, of a physical city, which some very advanced cities have. It's getting easier and easier to do that with the latest scanning techniques and the Gaussian splatting and everything else. It's an amazing progression there. But then, as you said, most of them are. Then the digital twin is a very broad theme, just like smart city, and it includes many types of digital twin applications, which are more operationally focused in terms of actually changing elements of operations and managing them. And whether that's public transport or other types of digital twins. So you got the subfamilies of digital twins, and then it really depends how many of those then are connected through a back office central data system into the overall city system. And our research so far showed that very few cities have that centralized digital twin system whereby everything is being run off a centralized command and control, for example. I think the closest we've heard is Seoul, probably, and Singapore to a certain extent. But it's really been driven by COVID in most cities because effectively COVID caused for a greater cooperation across many of the entities across a city to force the sharing of data into a central command and control. So that's where we are today. So I think, that any solution that allows for an overlay of AR should be compatible with any digital twin that's out there, and should be compatible with any of the existing enablers that are offered by Google or any other of the big tech companies. So I don't see any clash there. And it's really about, in terms of what the city wants to allow in terms of rules engine, and then how it kind of enables the ownership around the benefits of that. That's where it should be really clear, the rules around this, and to make sure that the benefits of whatever is being shown, first of all, that they are being shared across the creators in the best way possible, and potentially increasing the amount of benefits that the actual creator gets across all platforms, so that they can create content once and it can be seen in any of the platforms. So, for example, you're spinning Ferrari, you might create a new spinning car version of whatever it is. You create it once, and then if somebody's walking through that area and they're using Roblox, or they're using Meta, or they're using any other platform, they will see that content in exactly the same position, but they might be colored by the actual metaverse that you're using at the time to see it through. But the content is yours. You don't, you own it, which is not the case today. And that's, I know, something that the World Economic Forum is doing to solve. So first thing is that just kind of making sure that the rights around that is distributed to the right people, and the other thing is obviously making it safe and secure, and in line with the local social impact objectives of the municipality. Today, that's a big issue. So, I mean, having a Ferrari spinning in the sky is one thing, but having a Ferrari driving down the road is another. And effectively, not seeing a real Ferrari driving the road as you're kind of following another Ferrari down the road is an even bigger issue. So those are the areas where I think the rules engine can is really essential from the municipality level, to make sure that we can scale these things up in a much bigger and brighter way than just having things spinning up there but having them all around us, knowing that it's safe and we'll never put ourselves or our children or our friends in danger as we use them. So those are the
Yeah,
key ways to save them.
absolutely. And this is something that, we at Darabase think about a lot. At the moment, you've got a little bit of a kind of wild west where people aren't really considering. I don't think they're doing it deliberately, but they're not really kind of considering a lot of the kind of permissions and legal and regulatory requirements for digital content in physical locations. And so, at a first level, it's like, well, look, you need the private property company or private property owner's permission to be able to put, especially commercial content on their building. And there's precedent in that. We know the whole kind of Pokemon Go legal cases where that they were, if you have a private residence, you can ask for content to be removed, and they can only make Pokestops available in parks while the parks are open. And so these precedents already exist very specifically, but also just in terms of the way that kind of the laws and regulations for advertising and passing off and so on already applied. But then you've always then also had kind of a city level kind of regulatory and planning kind of thought process. So, okay, well, you may have a building on the side of a road, and you're quite happy as the building owner to put a large billboard or screen on the side of that building, but actually, I've just done a thumbs up. But
Oh, thank you.
but equally, at a city level, we're saying, well, actually, that's inappropriate because of where that particular building is. And so I think just basically the same approach applies. Cities will have to think about where and what kind of immersive content can be placed in what parts of the city in order to make it both safe and appropriate. At the same time as property companies. Property owners think the same, retailers think the same, and so on. Okay, this has been a great conversation. I've got one last question for you before we wrap, which is we've had lots of kind of thought and conversation around the technology that kind of sits at the city level. So city controlled, physical controlled technology, and how that's evolved fast, and the opportunities and risks that is generating. I'm interested in your thoughts on kind of the consumer-led technology. So obviously, pretty much everybody has a smartphone. But in GCC, everyone's got two smartphones, and those smartphones are increasingly kind of aware of the world around them. They have lidar scanners. They have cameras. They are augmented reality devices as much as their mobile phones. But also, it's really kind of in the foothills of seeing significant, investment and future adoption around wearable devices too. With Meta and Apple and Google and Microsoft and many others investing heavily in this new way of engaging with digital content, which will be increasingly wearable and spatial rather than kind of mobile phone focused and two-dimensional. So how do you see that playing out? How do you see cities needing to evolve, just in the knowledge that the way that people are engaging with content inside of their environments could change quite significantly?
Yes, but I mean, I come from the mobile industry, so do you, Dom. So we know how important it is. But so the smartphones are not going to go away, and I think the first attempts over the last 6 months, we've seen some kind of wearable AI devices and rings and everything else, and I think the conclusion is, so what? I mean, you can do it all with the phone, right? So smartphones are not going to disappear. They're just going to get better and better. Maybe they get cognitive. They're going to have soon their hologram projectors coming out, and all manner of fantastic, projections coming out and experiences. However, the way I see it developing the consumer device is very similar to music. So nobody really, or very few people now walk around with their phone stuck to their ear, right? So whether it's conversation or it's music, we started with the wired headphones, and then it went to the wireless headphones. Come on, everybody uses that nowadays, right? Yeah. So I see the same with visuals. So the smartphone is not going to disappear. What will happen is this huge variety of incredible devices that are coming from two directions. They're coming from the VR world moving into the mixed reality world. And those are replicating reality, which is a bit more expensive, but can be very interesting. But they're more wraparound. Then you got the kind of Google Glass type of AR overlay glasses moving into the mixed reality world. And there's a huge variety of devices coming out there. From my perspective, we need to design the city experiences from that point of view, because I believe, and I'm 100% convinced on this, that over the next 2, 3, 4 years, you will see that these devices will be connecting, whether in wearables to a certain extent as well. But talking about the visuals, you'll be experiencing these through glasses, of some form of glasses that we all have, whether they're eyeglasses, sunglasses. We all have some form of glasses, right?
Yep.
So they will still connect through the smartphones and they'll be with you. But where the city can help is in making sure that you can use them safely as you're out and about. That wherever you're actually designing new areas of the city, such as in NEOM or in Riyadh, you're designing them ready for these mixed experiences where you're walking around and you're seeing, you know, the wayfinding and everything else around you as it should be. And that's a huge opportunity for new areas because they can design them as mixed reality from the beginning. But I'm 100% convinced that's going to happen. It's not going to happen without the smartphones. I think it's going to be connected to the smartphones, Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7 connection locally. And then you've got everything you need from the devices. And with a little bit of wireless power beaming, etc., provided by the city and a spatial anchor system from the city, you've got everything you need. You effectively untether and release these experiences into the wild and make them safe for everybody. And that's when you scale it up.
Brilliant. Well, look, Mansoor, thank you so much. Should also say we're delighted that you've joined Darabase as an advisor as well. So we will be having many, many more conversations like this, I'm sure, but not necessarily recorded. That's been incredibly interesting. I'm delighted to have you as a friend and a colleague, and yeah, look forward to many more conversations of this type. Thanks so much.
Likewise, all the best. Talk soon.